thank you all for coming. My name is Jennifer Remenchik, and I am a member of the exhibitions team here at Brand and creator and moderator of Art Talks at Brand, initiative in which contemporary artists from the Glendale and greater Los Angeles area are invited to discuss their work and the issues that surround it, followed by a discussion with myself and a public Q&A. This program is free and open to the public, and I would like to take a moment to thank the Brand Associates for their generous support of the program. Andres Payan Estrada currently lives and works between El Paso, Texas and Los Angeles, California. He works predominantly with craft-based processes, exploring social surfaces, ephemeral exchanges, and cultural histories. With a focused lens on queer identity, his recent bodies of work span collage, fused glass, ceramics, and jacquard weaving, examining both the physicality and transience of queer nightlife spaces. These works consider nightlife's vital role as a site of gathering, protection, becoming, and simply being. It includes the collection of found materials from queer bars and clubs. These visual and material fragments are transformed into sculptural works and immersive installations. Payan Estrada graduated with an MFA from the California Institute of the Arts. He is currently the senior curator at the Stanlee and Gerald Rubin Center for the Visual Arts at the University of Texas, El Paso. Was recently creative director and curator at Craft Contemporary in Los Angeles, where he co-founded Craft Contemporary's Clay Biennial. Payan Estrada has also shown in numerous exhibitions in Los Angeles, Texas, and Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Andres.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jen, for that incredible intro. I'm really excited to be here today. I've known Jen, we were just talking for about 10 years now because we both went to Cal Arts together. And actually a lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about today had its roots in some of the research that I started to do back when I was getting my MFA at Cal Arts. The work that I'm mostly going to be presenting dates from 2018 until what I've been currently producing. And I'll give you a little bit of background as to how some of these ideas started to form together. So I am originally from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, which borders with El Paso, Texas. I like to often start my lectures kind of like with information, with maps, instead of like immediately jumping into the artwork. And even with the lectures that I give about my artwork, I try to intersperse other information around the ideas, the process, and how these things are coming together. So I was born in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, and I was raised between both of the cities, so a binational experience of jumping between both nations. This is me when I was a little kid. So growing up as a little kid, I used to race a lot of dirt bikes. This was kind of like a sport that I was introduced to through my father. I have kind of this running joke, since a lot of the work that I had been doing specifically during undergraduate and into graduate school had to do with clay and ceramics. So I oftentimes talk about the idea that me being a little kid running around in a dirt bike was like starting to work with clay and with dirt. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up in a family that really didn't have access to the arts. So I didn't really go to my first museum probably until I was a teenager. So what that meant is that one of the first instances of me acknowledging some form of creative output had to do with what you see here. So this is one of the mercados in Ciudad Juarez, which were the ones that were that flourished throughout the entire city because of the tourist industry. Now, a lot of what you see here are objects that are codified as Mexican objects or Mexican craft, and a lot of them do remain being that, but the reality is that a lot of them have been constructed in order to be a signifier or a symbol of something that is Mexican. Now, I point a lot to this, and not that I was like walking through this and like over-intellectualizing it when I was a little kid, as I just did right now. To me, it was just like the color, the vibrancy, the materials, and these different ways and forms of being creative that were a little bit more accessible to me. Since I didn't really have the museum experience, the paintings, the sculptures, all that, as we know it through like the Western canon, this was one of the first interactions that I had, that I could work with clay. I could start painting on fabric. I could start working with all these like accessible materials that were around my house. Now that kind of like loops it back a bit to this dynamic that you see right here between both of these cities that are, as you can see, geographically, they're intertwined into each other, down to sometimes some roads seeming like they interconnect with each other from across the different countries, and they do with like Route 136 that turns into Route number 2 in Mexico. So I thought I talk a lot about this because this was the foundation of like how this was functioning within the cities. There were objects that were created for the tourists in order to represent an idea of what Mexico is. I start to dig around this because a lot of the work that I have been doing is starting to question not only why is the object made, but also who is it made by, what materials is it made in, and a lot of times like what identities exist around objects in our everyday life. Now, as I was growing up, it wasn't just this, there was also some of this. So this was a club, and that continues to be open, named Hard Pop, which was one of the first electronic dance clubs in North Mexico, specifically in Ciudad Juarez region. At its height, it was number 32 of the best electronic dance clubs in the entire world. I show this because just as this was a foundation of my formation, so was parting. And really, so this was, what was happening here is that it was in a more underground electronic dance scene that by nature opened up a lot of possibilities in terms of the diversity that existed within this, particularly sexual diversity. So upon me turning 18, 19, 20, and I'm able to exist in these spaces, of course I get introduced to these more fabulous spaces. And this was Albatros, which was the very first gay bar that I went to when I was 17. In Mexico, you can start going to bars when you're 18. It was still illegal that me being in there 17, but not as bad. The reason why I start showing this is because a lot of the work that I've been creating starts at a foundation of personal experiences that I start to research. And particularly this bar being Albatros, and this is a recent photo that I took of this bar. This in combination with Hard Pop, I started to think about what were the environments that were being created in order to create a space of joy, of partying, or of inclusion. And through the last 3 years or so, I started to focus specifically on photographing the different really environments that are created within LGBTQ, specifically gay nightlife, and how those are created. So in a way, kind of investigating like what are the architectural components of a space that make it a gay space or a queer space. And I have a couple archives that I built now of these different images. The main ones are photographing disco balls, and yes, like over 50% of gay bars have disco balls throughout the world. The other thing that I've been photographing is trails of light from the dance floor. And the other thing are the floors of the bars. Once they close down, I photographed the different traces of what's left behind, and I'll show you some examples of that. But I've always been really interested in what are these decisions that are made within a nightlife space in order to glamify it, in order to turn it into these spaces that are meant to be spaces that transform you or that take you into a different world. As elaborate as they may be, or as simple as they may be, like rhinestones hanging off of this kind of like light fixture, or a disco ball. Now, as I started to do this research, the research ended up going into not only the bars that are open, but I started to do some research into the bars that have closed down. And I've been able to visit quite a few sites. This is actually Albatros, the original Albatros, the location. Now it's spread out into 3 different locations, but I was able to get access to it because the owners still own this space and they use it as storage. Similarly, there is this bar, which is called the San Antonio Mining Company, which was in El Paso, Texas. And this bar originally opened in 1979 and was open for over 30 years. It had different iterations under the same owner. It went from kind of more of a speakeasy to a clinic during the 80s and 90s, specifically to give information about HIV. And then eventually turned into a club again. So I've been visiting not only the spaces that still exist, but the spaces that no longer exist. And this eventually led me to one of the first 5 projects that I'm going to be talking about. This one was in 2018, which is titled Blue Apollo. And this was exhibited here in Los Angeles in the Bendix building. And it was really truly like the first project that I did outside of graduate school. A lot of times I start my lecture with the graduate school work, but kind of talking about how graduate school work often is collaborative work because you're in constant conversation with not only your peers, but also your faculty. And in a way, all the ideas that you're generating in these spaces are these ideas that are being bounced off of everyone. So I like to start with this piece because this was the first piece that I did. I believe this was, what, 4 years, 6 years? 4 years out of graduate school. So to me, it felt like it was enough space between graduate school and this body of work that I was building on what I had learned at graduate school, not just bouncing off of what's told to me during graduate school. And this was the very first project that I did that I started to investigate all these things that I had been observing within queer nightlife. So anywhere from thinking about what are the objects that you see in these spaces that make them what they are, and what are some of the different techniques that are used in order to dragify the space. So anywhere from lighting to curtains to disco balls. You see a little bit of a dance floor there. So Blue Apollo, it also derived its name from, there is a bit of this conversation that it's often talked about that there was a codified name of naming queer nightlife spaces that often used a bird and a color. So like the red robin, the pink flamingo. So this one was kind of like following a little bit of those lines with the title of the exhibition, which was Blue Apollo. That was really a bit of a metaphor that I kind of started to construct on my own of what would it be like if you started to talk about the men landing on the moon in a similar way that you would talk about somebody stepping into a dance floor in a gay nightlife space for the first time. So that was kind of some of the ideas that I was exploring with this exhibition. So I started to use a lot of these very space-like aesthetics, anywhere from what you see here, which is the dance floor. It's 500 pounds of porcelain that was dried up, broken down, and then fired, in order for it to look like this lunar landscape that you see right here. But in essence, the porcelain is loose. It's a loose powder, but it has been transformed through the firing process, so it's no longer a raw material. It truly is in its route to become a porcelain. And to me, there's these like little gestures that I often use in my work that are sometimes invisible, but to me, these gestures are almost like a parallel of the different gestures that a queer individual does in their life in order to read a little bit different, to coat themselves a little bit different, to enter a space and be able to exist as who you are, even though the perception of it sometimes is different from the person who's seeing you. Part of this project was returning to not only the queer nightlife spaces that were open, but some of the ones that were closed. And what you see right here is a very simple constellation drawing. And the title of this piece is Downtown Los Angeles 2018 and Downtown Los Angeles 1969. And the reason for that is because the constellation that you see on the right is actually the geographic location of all the LGBTQ nightlife spaces that existed in downtown LA in 1969. And the way that I do that is pretty simple. I open up a Google map, I do a bunch of research in terms of like nightlife spaces that have closed down in different neighborhoods, either it be here in Los Angeles or other cities. There is a fantastic resource called Queer Maps here in Los Angeles that maps all that history that was done in collaboration with a lot of the information that you find in the Warren Archives in USC. But basically what you see here is I take the map, I put the geographic locations on them, and then that gets transferred over into what the drawing becomes as this constellation. And I was thinking a lot of these ideas of like, really, when you look up into the night sky, you see a lot of stars, but a lot of those stars, many of them are no longer there. Some of those have died, but it takes so long for that light to reach you that I was using kind of a bit of those metaphors with nightlife spaces, particularly when a space that was memorable or that was important to an individual has closed down, but its importance continues to shine. This was also the first time that I started to work a bit with this archive. So I mentioned that I had a couple photographic archives. This one's photographs of all the disco balls. So whenever I go to a nightlife space, if there's a disco ball, I'll photograph it. And now I have maybe like 6,000 photographs, maybe a little bit more. I haven't gone to 6,000 bars, but because I usually photograph the same disco ball over and over again. Or maybe I have gone to 6,000 bars at this point, I'm not sure. But this started this project, which is titled Many Moons, which is really taking that archive, printing it, and then hand cutting it. So all the disco balls that you see right here are all the photographs that I've taken from different nightlife spaces, truly around the world. Whenever I travel, I do my research on the food, on the museums, and what are the gay bars. And I try to go to as many of them as possible. I was just in Hawaii, and I was in Big Island, and they only had one gay bar, but it was the first thing that I went to as soon as the plane landed. It was great. So then those pieces get turned into these, which are collages on wooden panel. And what I do with these is they're gessoed with a black gesso, and then they have a ultra matte paint that goes onto them, and then each of the disco balls gets glued on individually. And this has been a series that I started to do and has extended quite a bit. And there's been different iterations. Some of them is, oftentimes I might do a piece that's a little bit more local or that is black and white. There's a series that I did that was specifically of the disco balls that I photographed from bars along the US-Mexico border. The other body of work that I have been working on is queer topographies. And this is the third iteration of the of the different archives that I have, which are these textile pieces. So I mentioned that I often photograph the floors of the bars, and I try to do it once the bar has closed down in order to just photograph all the debris, all the trash, everything that has happened. And then what I have been working with is there's two things, one of which working with a company named Wovens that I've been able to coat the images in order for their looms to be able to weave them photographically. They usually do work for interior designers, and they've been fantastic to work with. And right now I'm actually working on a new set of files because later in the month I'm going to be up in Tyler using a TC2 jacquard loom to weave some new pieces. But these pieces, as you see, they're woven, so you're able to see some of the detail of the thread right there, and the different patterning that the thread does in order to be able to create the imagery. With a lot of this work, I'm also playing off of this idea of the tapestry, and the tapestry as really a narrative device, and how the tapestry functions as many times is the idea is like who used to own the tapestry and what stories were being told in the tapestries. A lot of them were religious stories, or a lot of them were stories of opulence. So thinking about those two functions that a historical tapestry often had was how I started to work with these, except here the narrative is just the trace of a queer experience. And that could be just cups, that could be poppers, that could be a used condom, that could be somebody's car rental keys. Many times whenever I come across these items, if I have the opportunity, I pick them up and keep them, because I also have an archive of materials for some small scale sculptures that I'm going to be working on. I did not keep the keys I returned. And a lot of times they're really just explorations also on abstraction of what you're able to see on the floor. And the abstraction is usually furthered a step further. And some of these just compositions that happen naturally from like people dancing and dropping their stuff on the floor are quite beautiful. And I look for these connections of like, what do these different formations that happen. Like for example, this was a very similar one to a piece that did get woven, which is this one, which is called Eagle LA Constellation. And what you see here, the constellation that is being formed by those yellow objects are actually cigarette butts. And this was from somebody that had been smoking in the outside patio of the Eagle LA and had been standing next to my friend and I for over an hour. And during that course of an hour, he smoked quite a few cigarettes. And when he left, it was just a small constellation of cigarettes that he had left behind that I photographed a couple of times and then turned into this tapestry. Now the tapestries also, you'll see, have glass beads. And you might be able to see this in this one a little bit more. So naturally, when I started to pick up little objects and materials from the floor, one of the things that is most often found on the floor is broken glass. So that started to kind of like build a little bit of a register of a material that's pretty present within these floors in the nightlife spaces. Here you see this woven piece that has a broken Dos Equis beer bottle. And kind of in line with that idea of the tapestry as a narrative device and really messing with like the value systems of like, this is not a religious tapestry, although maybe it's a spiritual one, but it really is an image of a narrative of something that has happened. I also started to play around, similar to me picking up all these like trash objects from the floor, with the value system of what this piece is. So what you see here on the image on the right are these green beads that are made from the broken glass that I've been collecting, that I melt down, lamp work, and I'm able to string into the piece. You see another one on this piece over here on the left, right there. And the other thing that you might be able to see a little bit is there's some larger golden stitches here, which is actually hand embroidery that I do with a 24 karat gold thread to really kind of like amp up and really play with those different ideas of like these value systems of what is the value of a narrative of a one night at a party versus the narrative of a religious scene in a tapestry. And here is a quick photo of the process that I go through in order to melt down the broken beer bottles into these beads that are the ones that eventually make it back into the tapestries. And the last, well, actually I have two more bodies of works, which these two bodies of works, this one, Nocturnal Animals, started about 2 years ago. And then the second one that I'm going to show you, which is And the Sound of the Void Flowed Through Your Body, was completed this year. And these have been kind of really big culminations of a lot of this work that I've been doing little by little. As I was showing you, there was like the tapestries, there was collages, and there was that first project with like Blue Apollo. But this is where, for me, it started to all come together. And Nocturnal Animals was a large-scale installation of printed chiffon curtains. And these exhibitions, or these installations in particular, it was really important for me for them to happen not in a gallery space or in a museum, but in a space that used to be a queer nightlife space. So it's shown in 3 different places. It's shown in Guadalajara, in Ciudad Juarez, in Mexicali, and then next year it's going to be showing in Tijuana. So it's been traveling along the US-Mexico border, because with this project in particular, I honed in the research that I had been doing. I have so many photos of like disco balls and lights and floors. But with this one, I was specifically focusing on the nightlife spaces that exist along the US-Mexico border. And for a couple of years, some of them with friends or some of them on my own, I was able to visit all the main entry points between the US and Mexico. So San Diego, Tijuana, Mexicali, Calexico, Ciudad Juarez, El Paso, which is where I'm from, and Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, McAllen, Brownsville, Reynosa, and Matamoros. And at each one of the spaces that I was visiting, I was both conducting interviews, a lot of these I thankfully already had connections to somebody within nightlife in those spaces. So I was able to talk a bit with them about what is the construction of like nightlife in each one of the cities, and start to see the differences between each one of these cities. Sometimes a city catering more towards the United States, sometimes the city catering more towards the local community in Mexico. But eventually the visual representation of this research ended up being this installation. And what you see here is each one of these curtains is actually a photograph that I took. It looks like it's a projection because the photograph is of light and smoke, but the photograph is actually printed onto the fabric, as you can see on the image on the left. And each one of these images is of a different nightlife space in a different city along the US-Mexico border. So even if I were to look at these, like I know this is El Paso right here, this is Tijuana, that's Brownsville over there. Back there is Mexicali. And I started to build these curtains that are printed in chiffon and then created with it to be hung on these custom curtain rods that are hand bent in order to create these spaces or these divisions, many times mapping the architecture of the space. So for example, here I was mapping where the dance floor used to be or where the booths end, or aligning this to where the stage is in the back or where the pole is or where the disco ball used to hang. So it's both a mapping of the space and a ghost of the space at the same time. And the other idea is like I want it for them to feel cruisy as well. As you walk through them, you often see another individual across the curtain from you that is kind of like if you have been to a gay bar. There's usually smoke and lights and stuff like that. And many times, or any nightlife space really, there is the masking of the individuals and the people that are around you. So part of this was to both materialize an ephemeral moment of like euphoria of you dancing and seeing those like lights trailing and printing them on this like very delicate fabric. And at the same time trying to materialize that very ephemeral moment while being able to rematerialize it into a space so that there's a different experience to that moment as you're walking around the curtains. This is a version in Ciudad Juarez. This is still the version in Mexicali, which is one of my favorite spaces. The place was massive and had no AC. But the other part that is paired with this installation are these collages that you see right here. And typically the installation has anywhere between 4 to 6 collages. And these are specifically of the disco balls also along the US-Mexico border, as I had mentioned. And I try to use the architecture and what's in the space as much as possible. The only things that happen is usually like dusting and cleaning. But for example, here's the staircase where one of the collages is, and in the far back, you see that was the refrigerator where they used to keep all their beer and the ice, which is where the other collage is, and it's hanging inside of there. And then once you're able to pass through the installation, usually the center point, if I'm able to hang it in the center of the space, is this disco ball. And this disco ball was a handmade disco ball that is made of approximately 1,300, 12 to 13, I didn't count them, I lost track of them as I was gluing them. But in total, it was, I think, 2,300 porcelain tiles that were handmade. So they were handmade, they were hand glazed, and then I took the core of a disco ball and took off all the mirroring in it, refinished it, and then remirrorized it with these handmade porcelain tiles. So what you get at the end is an object that looks like a disco ball. So this is going back a little bit to that sand, the porcelain sand in the beginning. It looks like a disco ball, and to some extent it functions like a disco ball, but it's no longer that. It's a new object that is both a reflection of the disco ball, something that runs parallel to that, or perhaps is a shadow of it, because it doesn't really function in its totality as a disco ball. As you can see, there is reflection, but usually a disco ball, there's a mirrorized reflection that kind of creates this patterning across the room, versus this that creates this like more somber reflection on the room. And similarly to a strategy that I used in Blue Apollo, the disco ball, instead of hanging on the ceiling, which is what you would expect due to like the spectacle of the object, and what it's meant to do as a celestial object that you dance under. The object is then pulled by gravity down to the floor and usually hangs anywhere between 1 inch to 2 inches off the ground, so that your experience to the disco ball is no longer this moment of awe, but this kind of, I often kind of like build a parallel that you are looking up into the skies for possibility, but you usually look down to the floor to mourn. So there's that idea of like thinking about the celestial and the terrestrial at the same time. Oh, this is some of the process. And that's my friend's hand who helped me make it. It was a lot of work. It was so much work. As you can see here, like each one of those little tiles had to be hand glazed with 3 different coats of glaze, with the same glaze but 3 coats in order to get that little beautiful chrome shine. And then here's one of the images of the curtains that you just saw. Now the last body of work installation that I'm going to talk to you about is "And the Sound of the Void Flowed Through Your Body." This is the latest piece and installation that I've done. This was created and shown in May, in April to May. And right now, I'm in the process of working towards this exhibition in Tijuana, which would be a combination of both the work that it was part of Nocturnal Animals, not Nocturnal Animals, Nocturnal Visions, and also "And the Sound of the Void Flowed Through Your Body." So both of these bodies of work are being expanded on for this larger exhibition that's going to be in Tijuana. But this one ended up being at the space that I showed you, which is the San Antonio Mining Company. And there was truly 2 large sculptural pieces that were a part of this installation, and then a combination of other sculptural objects that are sprinkled in there. The main one was this piece that you see right here, which is a 2-scale replica of a dance floor that used to be at the Albatros bar. Hey, Steve. At the Albatros bar in Ciudad Juarez. So this is a 2-scale replica. This dance floor no longer exists, but I was able to ask by permission from the 2 owners of Albatros, which is a lesbian couple that has owned bars there in the region for about 35 years. I was able to pull out older photographs in order to get the scale of what that platform used to measure, and then create a replica of it with some queer local woodworkers there in the region. And it's made out of white oak. So did some research in terms of what would be a good wood, a hard wood that would create, that I could play around with the material density in order to emit sound out of the entire piece, not just the subwoofers that you see mounted onto them. So I built this in these instances that I was traveling back to El Paso, and it was part of the exhibition. And what you see there are subwoofers that are usually made for cars. So you build these wooden boxes in your car in order to give your car that like kind of vibe. The car usually only has 1. So what I did is I did 4. And essentially the entire object becomes a sound object. And the sound pieces that are being recorded off of that, and I might be able to play one for you in a minute, are recordings that I used using a contact microphone, and I plugged those contact microphones into dance platforms, so like either go-go dancer platforms or drag queen platforms or just a platform where everyone's dancing, and the recordings of that is what's being played off of this piece. And I'll play, I think I might be able to swap this to play the audio, do you think? I think you should try it. Okay. Okay, we'll try it.
Yeah, try it.
We tried it, it doesn't work.
It really doesn't?
No.
No.
But here.
Just see if you can turn it up.
Yeah.
The acoustics in here are pretty good.
It's a very ghostly. Can y'all hear it a little bit? It's kind of this like droney, almost what sound sounds like if you were outside of a space that has really loud music inside. So you kind of like get this like ghost echo in the outside. And the other pieces that were a part of this were another one of these constellation drawings. This one in particular was made from the geographic locations of nightlife spaces that had closed down in El Paso and Juarez. So you get a little bit of the top being El Paso and the bottom being Juarez to generate and create a new constellation. And this piece in particular had also a takeaway poem that was a eulogy combined with a love/breakup letter written to a bar that no longer existed. And I'll read an excerpt of that as a way to close this off. And the other piece that was in here, there was two more. One of them was the disco ball that you see here. Now this disco ball is hung on the ceiling because this disco ball is the original disco ball from that space that had, once it had closed down, it had been given to somebody else, and I was able to track it down. It had been in storage for like 10 years, so we were able to pull it back out and hang it back up in the same spot that it used to spin. And then the last piece in this exhibition was what you see here, which is a piece that is made out of 600 beer bottles collected in different nightlife spaces in El Paso. And the beer bottles were broken down and they were put in the kiln in order to fire them down to create this dance platform piece. And you see this right here. So I was going out into all these. This was a bar called Chiquitas in El Paso that was the main space that was giving us all the beer bottles for this. So I was washing them, rinsing them, delabeling them, and then breaking them down. And let me show you, in order to be able to fuse them in the kiln. So made custom molds for that in order to be able to pull those into the kiln. And let's see, I'm gonna pull up real quick an excerpt of the poem. Which is, and the poem exists as a material thing, just a stack of papers. I don't usually send PDFs of it or anything, and it only exists in 500 copies. I have the digital file, so I can read it. But it's, how long has it been? Walls don't keep time the way bodies do. I stand here, staring into the vast darkness of your pupils, wide as space, a churned darkness dense enough to fold memory and fracture time, a nebula where breath and sweat condense into new stars. Did you know what you were creating? A gravitational collapse disguised as a bar. You didn't walk in, you were drawn, like stardust towards a singularity. Inside, the lost changed. I thought about you last night. Where were you? Your absence felt louder than any sound. Not silence, exactly. A lack of sound altogether. The mute hum of a dying star. Do you remember how we met? The first time I set foot onto your surface, like a first step on a foreign terrain, shattered and trembling. That floor wasn't wood or concrete. It was a surface, a body, a threshold, a place we crossed into in order to become or to be, or disappear altogether. In my memory, the music didn't come from the speakers. It was born from something older, a grief perhaps, or a joy so large it bent itself into the shape of yearning. And in that yearning, we moved not to remember, but to forget, or maybe the other way around. Yet we were dancing, we were orbiting, bodies dissolving into the flashes of light, into shimmers that shuddered like memory, and you stood there watching as you spun us into fragments. You should know I love you, I still do, in the same way that one loves gravity. But someone left and someone stayed, and someone else turned off the lights. Someone became the shadow of another body, an empty dance floor that no longer hums. A silence too complete to be silence, the kind you only hear in deep space where even light arrives late. I have been writing to smoke. I have been holding hands with the trembling echo, illuminated by the afterglow of something no longer here, like a sun-long collapse whose light hasn't stopped arriving. But perhaps we are the dying star, the light still traveling, the last dancer on the dance floor. Maybe that's the truth of it, that stars die alone. Some nights we are the stars, some nights we are the dancer, some nights we are the floor, some nights the room itself, breathing in and out like a collapsed galaxy. Our bodies, temporary stars, brief, bright, impossible, still, dancing, still. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely presentation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. It was good to see it all again. We went over a lot of things. We had a studio visit not that long ago when you were in town. And yeah, I was curious. Well, it's kind of funny too, because this is a really big stretch. I don't think this is necessarily related, but you know, there's so many cycles of like longing and fulfillment and kind of like, yeah, it gets really bright.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. Welcome to the theater.
Yeah.
But like, of longing and fulfillment. I don't know. I was just thinking about how much time you spent traveling and like the ways and the time that I've known you, like you're always going in between. We never officially going in between El Paso and Los Angeles, but you've always been going there. In some weird way, it reminds me of this feeling that I connect to, like the longing of nightlife, of like sort of being present, but also like almost always longing to be somewhere else. Longing to like find someone at the nightclub, longing to go again. You know, like there's a lot of back and forth between an almost kind of like spiritual fulfillment, right? Of being lost in the crowd and like you let go of your ego. But then there's also like the intense ego experience of longing. You know what I mean? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Totally.
Or how it relates to like maybe your work, your life, your fascination with
Well,
it?
I think a lot of that ideas of like longing and yearning and these things, like I see a lot of times like the root of it was this relationship that I had of having to travel between both countries constantly. I mean, this is not an uncommon experience. Like a lot of people who live along the U.S.-Mexico border oftentimes live on one side and go to school on the other or go to work on the other. And I was doing this all throughout, I don't know, I think I started doing it when I was in first grade, all the way through my sophomore year, where I was in Mexico and I would cross the border to go to school every day. So to me, these longing, these ideas of longing, these ideas of transition as it relates to like the movement from one point to another have always been present in how I articulate a lot of these ideas of the travel between like the object and where it ends up being and what it ends up becoming. Another kind of like weird tangent thing that I always think about is because I think a lot about the process of like going somewhere, like going to the club. And I had this running kind of like joke with some of my friends from back in graduate school that whenever we would get ready to go out in LA, like that to us, that was the most fun part, getting ready, meeting each other, being in the car, playing music, driving somewhere. Once you got there, it was like social anxiety center. But like just like that idea of like being with a group of friends that was a safe space and doing that, like to me that was like, that is as important to that entire experience as like the night at the bar.
What's one of your most fun places to party? Doesn't have to be LA.
Oh boy. I don't know. I feel like it depends on the mood. That's another thing that is really compelling, specifically of like nightlife or queer nightlife, is that there is so much complexity to it. Like it's not just like you're gonna go to a bar and it's gonna be like no, it could be like you go to a bar and you just like sit down and you're the only person at this like bar in the middle of like a neighborhood, and you have a great conversation with whoever the bartender is. So I feel like there's different registers, and depending on kind of like what my mood is, like there's a different register. Like, yeah, like sometimes I want to go back to Berlin and like get lost in Bergheim, or sometimes I just want to go to Akbar at like 12 p.m. on a Tuesday. Just kind of like depends.
And do you like also, I'm just thinking of like some of the sort of interesting experiences I have had in bars in like rural or weird, where it's just like you would not ever expect. I didn't do this right. I often don't. Wow. But like where you would, I don't know, it's just unexpected sometimes how much fun you can have in a place that you thought would be like dead. You know?
Totally. I mean, all the travel that I did along the U.S.-Mexico border, it was both. It was really beautiful to be able to do that, but then at the same time, it's challenging. And I travel a lot, not only to like gay bars, but like, you know, like I do a lot of road trips to go to like national parks and stuff like that. And I think there's these like different registers that happen when you're doing that, both of like what is your safety in that space, where are you alone, like all these things that kind of like just you naturally think about. But then oftentimes you find these pockets in like the middle of nowhere, and and I'm thinking particularly of a place that I went to in Nuevo Laredo in Mexico, which is currently a place that's quite challenging to visit because it continues to have a lot of the issues with the drug war. And then there was a place in the middle of the city that I was able to go to with a local that was called Selena's. And it was truly this thing, like everything that I had been thinking about, like portals and stuff like that. This literally had a tunnel that was covered in tinfoil. And then you walked through it, and then it opened up to this like super campy, beautifully put together bar in this region that has so many challenges right now. So you find all these spots, and to me, these are kind of like these like materialized reality of like what a queer community is able to do with these gathering spaces, whether they be nightlife spaces or not.
Yeah, and also, well, actually, this feels like an odd question to ask, but my relationship, I don't know about yours, my relationship to nightlife has changed a lot as I have gotten older. And I was wondering if like the reasons or I don't know about the reasons, but the intensity with which one goes out when they're like, you know, 19 and like you have a fake ID or something, like it's just like, woo, you know, versus like you've been to a million places and you're kind of tired and you're a little achy, you know. I'm just like curious if like over your life, if there's a different relationship you have to the space as you've gotten older yourself and matured, or view yourself differently.
I do, yeah. No, there's definitely a different relationship that I have to these places. Like, I think back then, the relationship that I had was this like exploratory, finding myself and what was the possibility, like the limit of the possibility of what I was able to do. Some of these things I can't do anymore. Like I have a couple drinks and like I'm hungover for like a while. So it was, I think it was partly that, and then now being in a different place, but still acknowledging what those things had been.
Right.
And I think the other thing that I think a lot about is something that I know this through my experience with the LGBTQ plus community, but that oftentimes those moments of like exploration and finding yourself within the LGBTQ plus community, they happen in different times of people's lives, depending where they are,
that makes sense.
and acknowledging like who they are or being able to acknowledge who they are. So oftentimes like you see somebody in their 20s or in their 30s or in their 40s or in their 50s having that moment of like exploring and understanding who they are and discovering these spaces.
Yeah, and on the same kind of note, when you think about your practice, do you think of it, and you know, the answer can be anywhere along the spectrum, but do you think of it more as an expression of your personal experiences navigating like this world, this nightlife, like these experiences for you, Or do you think of it as like an archive for the community, you know, like, or a service to the community? Or is it like more of a personal expression of your own experience?
I mean, I think at the root, it's like, it's a reflection of my experience, because like ultimately I think even a collection or an archive or all these things are subjectively go through an individual, most often than not, either an individual or an institution or a collective. So I feel like that the foundation is my experiences, and ultimately like I'm the one who like looks at like a hanging string of like beads that have been abandoned at a bar and like decides to photograph
Right,
that
it
because
becomes
I find
poetic
something
to
interesting
you.
in it.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I feel like so there's a lot of that subjectivity that's embedded into it. I think the practice in its bigger scope, I am trying to work more of this like objective, like multi-axis points into what the experience is. And
like creating a history or an archive?
Well, creating some form of archive. And I think that's starting to happen a little bit more concretely with like the focus of like nightlife along the US Mexico border.
Right, that makes
like there's
sense.
parts of the archive that are still to me just like aesthetic research of these things that I find interesting. But then there's a part of it that's starting to branch off into its own thing.
Oh, and then I was also thinking, because I never really think of you as someone who necessarily fetishizes labor, but a lot of your practices are pretty like labor intensive. Okay, I was being unintentionally funny, I guess, but it happens to me quite a lot. But like, but I don't think of you as someone who does that. So I was curious, like just for my, like when you find, like, do you like working really hard to produce an effect? Or do you get like a sense of relief whenever you find like that something you want to do is like, turns out to be easy? Because I know you learn new experience, like new ways to do things like in your practice, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you like, oh good, it's easy? Or are you like, oh, I kind of wanted it to be hard?
I kind of wanted it to be hard.
Yeah.
No, I feel like, I feel like from graduate school, like I wanted everything to be difficult. And I think a lot of that had to do with like my connections and me processing like these ideas. Cause like my work has a lot of craft in it.
Right.
So it has like a lot of like thoughts around like objecthood, materiality, and the hand.
Right.
But I try not to fetishize the hand.
Right.
And I think that's evident in the objects, because like the objects, a lot of times the hand is not there, or evidently there, that tangibly. Yeah, but I do like, as I like being able to print the curtain, I also like having to do thousands of tiles.
Well, yeah, and like also, I mean, it kind of goes, I think I also, you know, I've known you like for a long time, so I know other aspects of your personality, like you're a very gracious, meticulous host, you know, you're very, like your fashion is always like on point. So like, I'm just like, oh, like, you know, maybe he just likes to, you know, meticulous things, you know what I mean? Because there's like, I can even see a relationship, like I was also gonna ask you, you know, you showed that market, but there is this sort of like party decor sometimes, like even those curtains or like things like that where I'm like, oh, there's this like connection. There's like a connection to something that you could see as a, not a ready-made, but something one would encounter as a ready-made usually. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a disco ball for most people is a ready-made because they just buy it made, you know, but when you like take, you know, thousands of them and cut them all out and collage them, it's a different sort of thing. Like it's a ready-made, but it's very constructed by you, you know? So I don't know, I was just thinking about that relationship between something looking easy, but being full of labor.
Yeah.
Especially with those weavings too, because they almost look, like if you see these weavings, like it's kind of, they could just be like, it's hard to see all the detail in them because they're so dark, you know what I mean? But if you get really close to them, there's tons of it. you know?
I think I do like to play a lot with timelines in my practice. Like for example, the archives, like one of those archives is like 15 years old, like the Disco Ball archives, and versus like some of the other archives which are younger. And I like to play with these timelines of being able to have like something that to me is like a long game of something that I'm working on, that I'm not waiting for like it to like happen quickly and then be like cool. But I do have those projects that are like these like short-term projects. And I think for me, like I often use the analogy of like cooking, like you're cooking and different ingredients need different times. And sometimes you need to set something in the back and let it simmer for like a couple hours or many hours.
Yeah, you're good at that.
Like flash firing stuff over here. And
I don't really get how people are good at that. It seems so challenging to me.
So I think a lot about like the studio practice like that too, where there's like these projects that are like running for like 3-4 years versus something that I'm making quickly, or something that I'm making quickly but it's going to take like a year to make. So I kind of like play around a lot with that. And I think part of that is also playing around a little bit with like the hand too. Like not fetishizing the hand, but like being very thoughtful about where the hand is and how long the hand is there as well. Because like, for example, those tapestries that I've been showing, those are digitally woven, but then they're like hand quilted and embroidered and attached and all this other stuff, versus like in 2 weeks where I'm going to be doing the jacquard, the TC2 loom, where the hand's going to be more evident, because like I'm literally going to be there like,
yeah, and I'll just ask one more question and then we can turn it over. But it is really interesting, even thinking about it right now, about this like weird relationship that nightlife has to time. Because like what you were saying, like the most fun is like the pregame kind of for you, where you're spending long amounts of time with like your friend group, and then you go out and it's like sometimes time gets so sped up because you might have too much to drink and like the whole night's a blur, or like or there's like poppers or whatever, like there's like time is really different, or you have a horrible night and it seems like it lasts forever, you know, because your friend is like going crazy or whatever it is, and you have to babysit them, whatever. I'm not speaking of personal experiences, but like just the other day, no, but like, yeah, so anyway, it's just interesting thinking about like there's an element to your practice. There's such an immediacy to the fun of nightlife. Like when you're in that moment, you're in the moment, and time disappears, right? But there's also a lot of patience, you know, there's a lot of other long drawn out stuff in between those moments of like bliss or fun. And your practice seems to mirror that in kind of a way.
Yeah, and I think maybe like the making mirrors that too. And then lately the showing has been mirroring that as well, because with a lot of the work that I've been doing in the found spaces, since they're not spaces that are equipped to be able to have like art installed in them, sometimes they don't have electricity or water, stuff like that. Like there's these like added challenges to exhibiting work in them. And many times like those exhibition runs have to be shorter, or they have to be timed. So there's almost kind of like this, like it's only going to be open for 4 hours. So like it starts to like weirdly like emulate these like cycles.
Well, it's also a lot of work to run a bar or to run a nightclub, and you just show up there and you're like, let's party, and it's like a lot of work went into giving you that space. You know. Okay, but let's open it up for a couple of questions. Yes.
Andres, it's not a question, more of an observation. I think one of the things that I find very beautiful about your work is the idea of queer time, because queer time is nonlinear, because it kind of has these stops and starts for individuals, but I like how you interweave the archives together. So I love it. Like for me, celestial time is queer time. So I just find that very poetic. So yeah, it's just an observation. You don't have to respond to it.
No, that's, I mean, we're looking at like deep space Hubble telescope photo behind me, which is a thing that I look a lot at whenever I'm building these bodies of work. But then like kind of like thinking about like how time functions and all these like different scales. Like I like the combination of like having like the Hubble telescope image, and then at the same time like the Felix Gonzalez Torres like tattoo, where there's kind of like these like different ideas of how time functions between like these like deep sublime time that I attached a lot these ideas to yearning and to these also ideas of mortality, but then there's also like the beauty of like immediate time and like these like times that you're able to like build with other individuals, however long or however short those might be.
In regards to your downtown LA constellation pieces, 1969 versus 2018, I was wondering, I think it was 2018. I was wondering if you've read City of Night by John Reschy.
I have it in my bookcase.
He talks about being a hustler in different cities, but he talks a lot about downtown Los Angeles in the 60s and like all of the queer spaces that were down there, but specifically like the physical layouts of the bars, like where the dance floor was, if there was one, jukeboxes, bartenders. So it's really interesting.
That's amazing.
But there's like so many he talks about.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, another thing, I was particularly interested in that era of like 1969 because that exhibition was loosely connected to like the Apollo mission too, and kind of like that time connection of the Apollo mission moon landing with the Stonewall riots, which were just about a month away.
Yeah, his writing on it is super, super descriptive. So.
Oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful.
Read it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'm so really curious. I realized as I was looking at all of these images and sort of the stories of like taking photographs after the bar closes versus the person you're talking to dropping the cigarettes. When you go and take the photographs, we have these phones with pretty amazing cameras these days, and so you don't necessarily need like a lot of kit with you. But was really curious if you ever like to sort of formalize the experience of like collecting these images versus the ones that sort of happen, as your experience again.
So I never formalized it, and I think that was a decision that I took pretty early on, that I didn't want to introduce a camera into these spaces that felt like there was like a registry being made of the bodies that are in there. And so so everything has always been with the cell phone, and I usually time it so that it is not intrusive to like an individual's experience there. And I never photograph people. Like in all the archives that I have, it's usually either objects or lights or floors or things that are architectural, because there's two things, like being aware of a camera and the performativity of like behind a camera, but then also the safety of that, particularly with these communities. And here in the United States, it's not as common, but there's like a lot of places in Europe that don't even allow you to like photograph once you're inside these bars or these spaces, in which case I usually have to be there till the end. And then and by that time I've already like met the owner or whatnot, and then I'm able to photograph.
Anybody else? Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Do you foresee traveling some of the installations abroad?
So right now it's just been in Mexico, and then currently working on a plan. Well, actually, the disco ball and one of the curtains is in Palo Alto right now, in an exhibition up there. But so far it's just been either States or Mexico. It would be interesting to see how they register in different places. I mean, there's a lot of being of the objects to be able to be in conversation with whatever's around them geographically, and a lot of the archives do pull from all the different places that I've been. So there's like a lump sum in there of like France and Germany and stuff like that. I think Germany would be an interesting place. if anyone knows anyone.
Yeah, it's also, oh, go ahead.
Oh,
I have a recommendation for Berlin stuff.
hey, put it up there. See?
It's also interesting too that, you know, the thing about when you photograph people as opposed to the objects around, it so quickly goes into that sort of thinking of being an archive of a community in a very direct way, because there is so much canonical and just generally a lot of work done in that style. So I feel like it keeps it from kind of going into that category of almost like documentary kind of photography.
True.
You know.
True.
But is there any more questions? Okay, one more and then we'll wrap up.
This is an easy one. It's a material question. Is there, you referenced the markets growing up as like your first exposure to craft and material and what possibilities there were for making. Is there anything from that time that you have like considered or thought about with your next coming works that might include like an overlap in material or like a craft from anywhere or material from anywhere maybe that you would want to use that you haven't used?
You know, I think there's a couple of things that I think about. Like the biggest one right now has been the glass, which I've been really happy with what I was able to do with that. But that was one of those like that was lingering from when I was a little kid. I remember seeing lamp workers in these stations like making little butterflies and dolphins and stuff like that. So that was one thing that had stuck in my mind and like now turned into like a big old like gay dance floor, like made out of like broken beer bottles. One of the things that's like still floating up there for me that I don't know if it's ever gonna make it into like a body of work is black velvet paintings. Like that. Those were you saw a lot of those, and actually my dad had one custom made of him like in a motorcycle that used to hang in our living room.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I feel like there's a material connection. I've already used black velvet in some installations and stuff like that, so I feel like it's lingering, like that could be something.
Yeah, you got to get on that. That's so cool. Like, okay, well, let's all thank Andres for this lovely lecture one more time.